Rand Paul went on CNBC to discuss his new bipartisan proposal to bring home $2 trillion that corporations are hiding overseas. So let's listen and take note of how incredibly patronizing he is to the host here.
Let's move on. Obviously, the big news of the day here is the proposal with you and Barbara Boxer that would allow our companies, which have about $2 trillion worth of cash overseas, to bring it home, a one-time holiday, I think at a 6.5% corporate tax rate. Senator, I'm sure you know that most of the research on this indicates that these actually cost more money over the long term than they save.
Well,
Are
that's
you saying
incorrect.
That your plan will be different?
Let's go back again. Your premise and your question is mistaken, okay? Most of the research doesn't indicate that. In fact, there's a prominent study by Robert Shapiro looking at the holiday in 2005 when we lowered the rate to 5%, and his conclusion was that it brought $300 billion of new capital home, and then it brought in about $30 billion of new tax revenue. The whole purpose of doing this is to bring money home.
There's it works that
let me
first year,
finish.
Senator.
Hey, let me finish. Hey, Kelly. Hey,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry,
quiet,
go ahead.
Calm down a bit here, Kelly. Let me answer the question. The whole point of this legislation is that money has been accumulating. Much money has been actually inverting, and people are reincorporating because the tax code in our country is not encouraging money to come home. So this is to lower a tax rate, to bring more money home, and to take that new money, some of the tax revenue, and put it into the highway fund. I think this is a win-win-win. You lower a tax rate, you bring in more revenue, and you're actually able to plug a hole we have in our highway trust fund.
What people want, Senator, is for you to make this permanent. Why not just make it 6.5% period? The problem is that, as it happened in 2004...
Let me answer the question before you get going.
I counted 3 times. 3 times, and he's like, www.shh.com. Have I introduced you to my friend Zippets McGee? Shut her up, woman, let me talk. Oh, that was so awkward to watch. Because it's not like she really was out of line and talking over him nonstop. If anything, he was talking over her. And you saw her face when he like got testy. She was like, all right. It's like, okay, dude, I'm not the weird one here. You're being weird. Oh, that was probably... Rand Paul's usually okay at avoiding the super creeper interviews that we see out of people like Rick Perry, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, because those guys just genuinely are dunces. Rand Paul's smarter than them, but here, you know, he just comes off looking abrasive and looking silly. And also... let's dive into the substance a little bit here, too, because their idea is, the bipartisan idea is, let's bring home these, the $2 trillion that stashed overseas, that big corporations are stashing overseas to avoid taxes. And the proposal is, let's do a 6.5% tax rate and do what's called a tax holiday. So you make it so that they wouldn't have to pay the full rate, you give them a reduction on that, and then they bring it home, and then, of course, we end up getting some more tax revenue, and supposedly everybody's happy. That's how the argument goes. But the problem with his proposal, and also Barbara Boxer, because it is a bipartisan proposal, and they're both proposing it, you've set up a false dichotomy. They say, oh, either we keep it's 0%, so we leave the money overseas, or the corporations leave the money overseas, or we can bring it back and tax it at 6.5%. It's one or the other. There is no third option. Why is there not a third option? You just made up that rule right now. Of course there's a third option, and there's a fourth option, and there's a fifth option, and there's as many conceivable options as we could come up with. You're the government. You get to make the laws. I mean, he made it seem like either 0% or 6.5%. Now, I'll tell you what my plan would be in a second, but first let me run through some facts here. So the corporate tax rate nominally, the nominal rate, so essentially what it is in theory or what it is on paper, is 35%. Now, oftentimes you hear Republicans scream about that and say, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the modern world, and this is why the economy is struggling, and yada, yada, yada. Now, the problem with that argument is it's not true. Because the nominal rate, or the rate in theory, is not what's called the effective rate, which is the rate that's actually paid by the corporations. Now, that number is 12.6%. So they're not paying 35%, they're paying 12.6% on average. And then furthermore, when you dive deeper into the details, you find out that a third of the richest companies pay less than 10%. And then again, when you go even deeper down the rabbit hole, GE, Exxon, and 10 other major corporations had a negative tax rate, where we're giving them a net subsidy and they're not actually paying taxes. Now, this next fact here, this says it all to me, and this is a debate-ending point. Quote, in 1952, the corporate income tax accounted for 33% of all federal tax revenue. Today, despite record-breaking profits, corporate taxes bring in less than 9%. That's amazing. So, the tax burden has now shifted. It used to be on corporations and the rich because we also had a higher marginal income tax rate back then, but that's been slashed. So now the tax burden shifted from the rich and the corporations to the middle class and the poor. And our tax bill has gone up. So how do we handle the situation, or what's a smart way to handle the situation? Well, what I would do is I would propose a bill and pass a bill that essentially makes it so that any company that's storing billions of dollars overseas, we fine them. And we fine them tomorrow, and we fine them at the equivalent of a 36% tax rate. So then what are they going to do? You say, hey, your options are pay the 36% tax rate for, whatever your profits are in billions that are held overseas, or you can bring that money home and pay the regular corporate tax rate, the full rate, no deductions at 35%. Your choice, big guy. So either 36% and keep it overseas because I'm fining you, or 35% because you pay all your taxes when you bring the money back over here. Now you might say, Kyle, it's unfair to take away whatever deductions they would have had in the first place. I say that's absolutely not true, because the reason why they're storing that money overseas is to avoid paying taxes. It's tax evasion. But since they have an army of lawyers and accountants, they find a way to legally do it. Ask Wesley Snipes how tax dodging worked out for him. He gets thrown in jail because he's an individual. But if you're a corporation, you hire all these different people to find a way to subvert the laws, hide the money overseas, and rob the American taxpayer. And this is why we have a crumbling infrastructure, and this is why the tax burden has shifted to the middle class and the poor. So there are your choices. Pay the 36% fine or pay the 35% full rate, and you bring the money back. But see, the problem is, under Democratic administrations, and of course Republican administrations, we're going to get neither of those things. In fact, I think the sad reality is that a 6.5% tax rate is the best we're going to get. And it kills me. That fact kills me because, again, the effective corporate tax rate in America is 12.6%. And that's not enough, and that's abysmally low, and that's nowhere near the actual rate of 35%, the nominal rate. So it's already less than what it should be, and then they're cutting deals to help out criminals to make them pay less than that. Again, I mean, I want to make another comparison just so you understand how thoroughly our government has been bought and how it's owned by the multinational corporations. If somebody goes into a bank and robs it, and then they get caught on the way out by the police officer, does the cop say, hey, wait. Now look, I'm not going to arrest you, even though you're stealing money, but I am going to charge you 35% of that. The guy would be like, what? Okay, actually, no. Let me only give you 12%. Actually, let's drop it some more. How about you only give me 6% of the money and you keep all the money you robbed? That's what we're talking about here. But you're able to do it when it's systemic and when it's multinational corporations and when it's rich guys in suits and ties who are doing it who have bought the government. We've legalized crime in America, but the crime is a Wall Street crime, so it's okay.